understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you there? Time for the podcast. You're smiling already, John. What are you laughing at? I'm slightly off.
He was ranting. Before we came on air, he was ranting, and I was just letting them get it all out of him. Is that out of your system?
No. It's all gold. It's podcast gold, John. It's all podcast gold. We are looking at the tallies. We are recording this before we get the final results of the European and local elections in Ireland, but of course the European elections all over Europe. Many European countries will not have gone to the polls until Sunday, so their results are in late anyway. So we won't know what the complexion of Europe looks like, but the general idea, John, before these elections was the extreme right were going to do extremely well. The centre were going to be squeezed, and the left was going to do okay. Right? That was the general idea. I'm not too sure how things have panned out. But here in Ireland, what I would say is in the last couple of years, the European election has been a little bit like the Eurovision Song Contest. We have sent people to Europe who are not necessarily representative of the mainstream of Irish politics.
Johnny Logan was.
Just sing What's Another Year. One of the great songs. But the general, what I would call is
He's a great guy, actually.
The Bambi Thugization of European politics, right? The Eurovision Song Contest, you're sending Dustin the Turkey, you're sending all sorts of performers who are not necessarily representative of mainstream Irish musical output.
Yes,
okay?
True.
Let us just say, that's a very diplomatic way of saying it.
That's a much better way than what you were saying earlier.
That's grand at the Eurovision level.
Yeah.
That is grand. In actual fact, almost every country sends something obscure.
Yeah, and that's good. That's the joy of it.
Yeah. So if you're from Finland, you have to have a
death metal.
A death metal, exactly. But when it comes to politics, the people who represent you at the European Parliament hopefully should represent the general views of the country. And that has not been the case, particularly in the last batch. 2 or 3 of the more prominent support Vladimir Putin.
Yes.
Are actively pro-Russia.
Yeah.
Right? That's not representative of most Irish people. There is a small element, but that's not necessarily the view of the Irish people. So what I'm saying is...
Well, there's a grain of truth in everything that they say, but it's kind of taken to the extreme.
I'm not sure there is a grain of truth. I think Vladimir Putin's a fucking prick.
Oh, no. Okay. No.
Right?
Okay.
And is a dictator.
That's true. All of that is true.
He just killed Navalny. He just killed his,
I'm not disputing that at all. I think it was just more from the social justice and all that kind of stuff perspective, that there is a grain of truth in it, but it's taken to the extreme.
Exactly. So preferably, if you want to send rather extreme voices, keep it to the Eurovision. And in fact, hopefully the European Parliament would reflect us, because it is a reasonably important forum, right?
It's a bit more than reasonably
important forum, right? And it is representative, and more to the point, if you're a small country, it actually suggests that this is your actual voice, when in fact the opposite typically is the case. So let's just see what happens in these things. But another thing that's been kind of interesting me is when Ireland goes on election mode, all sorts of slogans are thrown out as a general rule. And one of the slogans I hear, particularly from the left in Ireland, is that Ireland is neoliberal. You hear this all the time. Ireland's a neoliberal country. Ireland's unbelievably neoliberal. And it kind of sounds good. But I decided this week to have a look at the data, John.
Okay, but before you get into the data, just explain to me what neoliberalism is, in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. So basically, neoliberal is a philosophy. It's an ideology, neoliberalism, right? Which comes from our friends in the Austrian school, Hayek and von Mises, from about 120 odd years ago. Well, Hayek, not so much, Hayek about 100 years ago, right? And it's called the Austrian school in macroeconomics.
Yeah.
But the basic philosophy advocates kind of wresting control of the economy away from the government and giving it all to the private sector.
Right.
Limiting government intervention in the economy, lower taxes, free markets, deregulation, privatization.
Yeah, let the market decide.
Yeah, and at the core is basically the free market, where the rich should be allowed to keep their money because that's a reflection of their genius.
Right, and their hard work.
Well, the neoliberals really actually believe that inequality is fair, right? If you get your head around that, that inequality is a reflection of hard work and all that stuff. So people are poor because they don't work hard. And people are rich because they're geniuses, right?
And so it's essentially it's about a meritocracy.
But the meritocracy is the middle class acceptable version of neoliberalism. Because meritocracy kind of sounds that we're all meritus, right? You know, it's that idea of IQ plus effort equals merit. When in actual fact, we know that where you go to school, what your father did for a living, where you live, what your accent is, they're all enormously influential in the outcomes of life, right? So we all know that. You don't necessarily have to be Einstein to figure that out. But that neoliberalism, just to go back to this idea, is that free markets matter, public expenditure on social services should be slashed, and that's the idea. Now, of course, for most people listening to this, they say, is that the ideology of Reagan and Thatcher? Yes.
That's exactly what they were.
And it came about coincided with the same time of remember this, there was a big thing called the end of history. When the Berlin Wall fell down, there was a guy called Francis Fukuyama, an American political commentator, came out with a book which is at the end of history. Which is basically the left-right struggles are over, the market has won, yada, yada, yada. Now we know that's not the case, right?
And this, by the way, is also what Milei is advocating for in Argentina.
So it's
not going so well,
He's a real neoliberal. So what you hear when I'm listening to the RT debates and this, that, and the other is that the left side of the house, and the very legitimate side of the house, right? But the left side of the house fires these accusations, usually at Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, that they are neoliberal. And lots of nodding donkeys nod their head going, oh yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah, it's bullshit.
Why?
And the reason I say it, because we've got to look at the data, right?
Okay.
We've got to look at the facts. Is Ireland a neoliberal country? And in order to do that, you have to look at the welfare state here. You have to look at the way in which Ireland works. Now, I have always believed, and rightly so, in my opinion, that Ireland...
Of course.
No, not that I've believed it, but I've always believed the system in Ireland... All right, start that again. I've been exposed on my high horse, okay? But I have always believed that when you look at Ireland, the way our society works is a vast, vast network of taxes, transfers, subsidies, supports, and helps for a huge amount of people. Now, one of the reasons that I think this is the following. You know the way when you go to the UK, you've got left and right, and it's very, very polarised. And one of the great criticisms of Ireland was we didn't have a real left, and we didn't have a real right. So there was so much... that was kind of blancmangy in the middle, kind of a mélange of stuff. Now, I believe this stems from our Catholicism, right? But I think at the root of Catholicism, if you think of the idea of Catholicism, like the meek will inherit the earth, or it's more difficult for a rich man to get through the eye of the needle, all that stuff, it's a philosophy based largely on sharing and based largely on caring. And the idea that there is a broader community, and that broader community is part of something called society. And I believe that one of the reasons that those sort of very right-wing views have never really taken hold here is because they are inimical to Catholicism. And Catholicism is the deep underlying philosophy of Ireland and ideology. And you see that all over the West, in the big Catholic countries, Argentina being one of them, Spain being one of them, Italy, France, there is a resistance to this neoliberalism.
But like in America, which is also a Christian country, you know, with the Christian nationalism.
It's a Protestant country.
Yes.
That's the difference, right? And it believes in it starts...
But they're the ultimate.
Yeah, and they're the ultimate. So let's talk about it. Is Ireland a neoliberal country? So let's look at the facts. First of all, as I said, I think Ireland is a vast interlinked system of transfers. And the best way to look at it is, first of all, let's look at income tax, right? Because neoliberals say the rich should keep all their money and the poor require that money, and it's up to them to roll up their sleeves, get in their bike and work hard. So if we were a neoliberal country, the rich would keep most of their money in terms of income, and the poor would pay more. Look at the numbers, right? There was a Parliamentary Budget Office report published last week, and it shows that the bottom 73% of earners in Ireland contribute only 15% to the total income tax take. Those 20% who earn above the average contribute 30%, but the 7.7% of earners who are in the highest bracket pay 54% of all the tax.
Right, okay.
54%. So 7% of the people pay 54% of the tax. What that suggests to us is that the tax system is highly progressive, not regressive. So progressive tax means you pay more as you earn more. Regressive tax means you pay less as you earn more.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the neoliberal idea.
Yeah.
So if you look at just income tax alone, Ireland's income tax system is highly progressive, as I think it should be, right? But it's the anathema to a neoliberal tax system. And then you look at even the left-wing think tanks. There's a place called TASC, T-A-S-C, which is a very, very good source of lots of data and lots of opinion in Ireland, left of centre, run by the trade unions. Even they say, and I quote, Ireland's welfare system is already amongst the most redistributive when it comes to income in the world.
Right.
The state already does a lot of what they call heavy lifting. So the state is trying to rebalance the society all the time.
How do you mean heavy lifting? Like, what does that mean?
Well, basically, the Irish economy is highly, highly liberal, which means that if left to its own devices, many, many Irish people would be under the poverty level. I think it's close to about 40%.
Right. Okay.
So what happens is the tax and welfare system takes that starting point and rebalances it all. So that's what they talk about, the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
Right? So if you were to tax rich people zero, and if you were to start at that perspective, about 40% of Irish people would live below the poverty line. After tax and social spending, 8% of Irish people live below the poverty line.
Yeah.
So the tax and redistribution system is working incredibly hard to rectify and rebalance the society, right? So that is what makes Ireland unique.
Right, okay.
So the tax and redistribution system is doing an enormous amount of work to try and rectify the original position. And that is, I think, quite fascinating.
So how does Ireland compare then to, other European countries that we always hold up as
I mean, the Irish system does a lot more work to rectify inequalities, right? That is number one. And number two, where you see that is through a very progressive income tax system. And what you see that is through a very, very comprehensive, direct transfers, subsidies, helps, all sorts of things to millions and millions of people. Now, an interesting discussion that we might get into in the future one is, why does the Irish situation without the government deliver such weird outcomes? And why does the government have to work so hard?
Yeah.
Right? And that's for another discussion, right?
Okay.
But the question is, the Irish government does work very, very hard, right? So I'll just give you a sense, right? The Department of Social Protection had a very interesting report about a year ago. And it suggests that more than 3.3 million citizens in Ireland are beneficiaries of some sort of social protection. That's 65% of the population, encompassing young, old, and lots of people of all ages, right?
Yeah.
So more than 2 million people out of a population of less than 5 million are in direct receipt of welfare payments here. 2 million, right? And on top of those 2 million citizens, you put the 1.3 million children of all income brackets and all backgrounds who get child benefit.
Yeah.
That adds up to 3.3 million people are getting some help from the state every week. Now, that means almost every family in Ireland. Almost every family, right? So this is not a neoliberal country. This is a country with a vast network of subsidies and helps, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about last year, the government spent 24.6 billion on what they call social protection. Now, that's about 23% of all government spending. Around 9% of what we call GNI, which is the more accurate measure of national income.
GNI just is
gross national income. Right? So if you look at it, 9 billion on the state pension, that's over 485,000 people get that every week. Working income supports, which are 3.8 billion. You go on and on and on. So John, in general, there's about 25 billion is spent every year on social protection. That's pensions and also social protection for employment and for workers and whatever.
Yeah.
That's about 9% of gross national income, which is huge. And this is the GNI star. Remember we talked about that? The different, more accurate
Yes.
GDP. So the question is, all this suggests an enormous effort to create a safety net in the country. And again, I come back to the idea of neoliberalism. You know, how can we say this is a neoliberal state when you have that type of taxation, redistributing income, and those sort of social supports? And I'll just give you one other statistic, right? Yeah. Eurostat across Europe had a working paper in 2020, which pointed out that Ireland has a significantly lower share of residents not receiving social transfers than almost any other European country. So it's 9%. So basically it means that only 9% of Irish people do not receive anything from the state.
Right.
Whereas the situation in Germany is 21% do not receive anything. In Italy, it's 26%. In France, it's 16%. In Netherlands, it's 14%. So what you have is a much, much closer relationship to the welfare state for more people in Ireland.
Yeah.
And I think this is probably due to child benefit, okay? Because child benefit goes to all social strata, okay? And you can say maybe that's the wrong thing to do. But what it does, it says, you know, this country, for all its problems, has tried to create a welfare state which tries to rectify the inequality which drops out of the free market.
Yeah.
So it's a highly interventionist economy when it comes to the free market and the conclusions of the free market, because the state says, look, that is not right. Let's actually try and rectify that, which is, I think, the opposite of neoliberalism.
Yeah. Okay, I get that. But how does that go to explain our crap health system? Why are we backed up in A&E departments and all the rest? We're throwing money at it. So what's the story there? But before you answer that, let's do a wee bit of this. Okay, so, you know, you're talking about neoliberalism and how that term is bandied about.
Yeah.
But you're arguing that Ireland is the furthest thing from a neoliberal
I'm not
system.
I'm not even arguing, John. I'm just looking at the numbers.
Right.
The numbers don't lie, as they say. I'm just looking at the numbers.
Yeah, but, you know, with so much money and with that safety net that we've created, which is great, you know, it's not working for things like the health system. Why is that?
I mean, the interesting thing about the health system is if you look at the outcomes of the health system, so how long people are living, how long people are living with bad health.
Yeah.
How, for example, take COVID, where Ireland ended up with COVID. The health system is bang in the middle of the European average, right? But all health systems don't work in the sense that all health systems are characterized by huge, huge waiting lists, right? And the reason is very, very simple. When you get sick, you need to get seen immediately. And it's almost impossible to conceive of a health system that actually reacts to that. Even the French health system, the German health system, ones that we would look up to, still have very, very long waiting times. Maybe not as long as ours, but very, very long waiting times. So what you have in Ireland is a bizarre situation, it seems to me, that we have this weird fusion of private and public health, right? And we think it's weird, but every country has that with the exception of the UK. But the thing is that we benchmark ourselves against the UK all the time. So the NHS is what they call free at the point of entry.
Yeah.
That's very unusual. The vast majority of health services...
That's in a mess at the moment as well.
That's another mess. And of course, their waiting lists are much, much longer and their lead times are much, much longer, which is understandable because it is, you know, free at the point of entry. So you either have a price system or a queuing system. Either way, if you have something that you want to get where the demand is greater than the supply, you can either queue for it or you can pay for it.
Yeah.
So the way in which the Irish system works and the German system works is you pay into a private insurance. So it's VHI in Ireland or Bupa or any of those sort of things, right? So about 56% of Irish people have private health insurance.
Yeah.
Most of it paid by themselves, some of it paid by their employers, depending on where you work. In the continent, it's quite different. All employers have to pay the health insurance of their workers. So it's much greater.
Okay.
That's the first thing.
Wow.
But it's still based on an insurance idea. And that's, I suppose, the only way you can deal with health because health is a risk factor. So as you get older, you get more risky. As you get older, you need more help. As you're younger, you know, it's the same thing as insurance premium for drivers. Young drivers cost more, old drivers cost less because the chances of them being in an accident are higher. It's exactly the same thing in the health service.
Unless you're driving.
So you need, well, exactly. So on the health service, right, what seems to be the case is it's not the good intentions of the society that is the problem with the health service. It's management within the health service. Because as you said, like, it's not that we're not putting money into the system. But that money seems to be disappearing in layers and layers and layers of management. I think if you talk to people who work at the front line of the health service, they will tell you there are many problems. One of the major problems is this issue of management. The best example being the Children's Hospital. How can you possibly overrun with such extraordinary ease of using taxpayers' money unless there's a management problem and unless there's not so much a credibility problem, but unless there's a buck stops here. At some stage, the buck has to stop with somebody.
So if we had more of a neoliberal approach to the Children's Hospital, for instance,
we would have said it's going to cost you 400 million, that's it. And if you can't build it, get it done, right? Which is what most people do. But I think this is all about, and there's a lot of literature, John, about the nature of bureaucracies, that a bureaucracy is kind of like a tumor. It kind of grows and grows and it absorbs in the nature. The idea is a bureaucracy's whole raison d'etre is not to manage, but is to exist. And the bureaucracy itself becomes a parallel power structure within the society, within the system. And I think that's what's happened in Ireland. And there's a lot of discussion, a lot of sociological and political evidence for and writing about this idea that the bureaucracy then becomes in and of itself a creature within the system. So it's not that the political class can say, let's do this or let's do that, or a outside managerial class can say, let's do this. The bureaucracy itself can become malignant. And I suspect that's what's happening in Ireland. Because if you go back to look at the neoliberal argument, I think where people really feel the neoliberal argument makes sense is in, let's say, for example, multinationals. They think, hold on, we have slashed our tax rate, we've attracted in all these people, all this capital, that smacks of neoliberalism. I think that's fair enough. I think that's fair enough. But if you actually look at the data again, Ireland is now, the corporation tax went up from 12.5% to 15% in January of this year. We are now in line with the OECD's global standards, right? So we can't be neoliberal if we're in line with the global standards. But again, the point is the multinationals generated about 24 billion in tax revenue this year. Now, if we were a neoliberal country, that tax revenue would go to rich people in tax cuts. But it doesn't. By the way, Mrs. Thatcher did that. When they got money, they had tax cuts.
Trump did. One of the first things he did when he
tax cut for rich people, right? That's not what's happening in Ireland. That money is going back into the health system, the education system, the welfare system, etc. So neoliberalism is about choices. What sort of choices are people making? Now, what is also fascinating for me is that the people who are charged with being most neoliberal are Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. But they're actually the people who've actually created and built and maintained a welfare system.
Well, isn't it?
It's so weird.
And it's also a bit ironic because it will be the kind of anti-immigrant lobby who would be against the welfare state.
For everybody except themselves.
Yeah, exactly. The Irish welfare state, because it's so good, actually attracts
people.
immigration.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, there's loads of things going on. So I think with the multinationals, again, you have to say, well, okay, where is the money being spent? That's being generated by the multinationals. But the final issue is always and ever housing, John. Where people feel the real aggravation in Ireland, the real sense of us and them, the real sense of there's a gilded elite and there's actually the average person, is in the area of housing. Now, the question then is, does neoliberalism cause the housing crisis, as would be suggested by the left? That would mean that there's too much deregulation, there's too much free-for-all, right? Because if it's neoliberalism, you can build anywhere. But if you talk to people in the building trade, the problem for them is there's too much regulation. You can't build everywhere. You can't build high. You can't build at certain densities. You can't build in certain areas. So what they would say, the people in the market, it's not that neoliberalism is causing the problem, it's too much regulation causing the problem. And that, of course, then comes to the nub of the issue, which is what would be the most socially left-wing policy to have in Ireland? And it would be to tax the asset that is property.
Yeah.
Because this is an inert asset that only accrues to the people who own it and doesn't generate anything else.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that the parties that levy the accusation of neoliberalism would also be the parties that would most support a property tax, because that makes complete sense.
Yes.
That's a left-wing policy. And then if you look at the evidence, what you see is something bizarre. In Dunleary,
Yeah.
and let's say it's reasonably, I wouldn't say it's representative of the country, but it's reasonably representative of political ideologies, right? Who supports a increase in the property tax? You would imagine all the left-wing parties do. Labour? No. Sinn Féin? No. People Before Profit? No. They all want lower property taxes, which benefits the already rich.
Yeah.
Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil? No, they want it. The only parties that support increased property taxes are the Social Democrats and the Greens. So the very parties that are most likely to throw the slanderous idea of neoliberalism, Sinn Féin and People Before Profit and the Labour Party, are the very people who support policies.
Yeah, but can I just be clear though? And when you talk about property tax and land tax, you're talking about hoarding of land as opposed to somebody's house in general. Because I kind of understand slapping on more local property tax on your house is not a great idea. But slapping on a tax on land hoarding and derelict buildings and all that kind of stuff. Let me just tell you a really quick story.
Go for it.
One of the Fine Gaelers actually coming around canvassing to the house. And I got into a conversation, it was blah, blah, back and forth.
Of course you did.
And it was good. It was interesting. And you know, she was really enthusiastic until we got onto the topic of housing. And I said, why in this area is there so much, like Main Street, Dunleary and stuff, is there so much dereliction and empty properties and stuff? And I asked her, why aren't we slapping on big taxes on land hoarding? And she said, sure, Jesus, we wouldn't get elected if we did that.
Exactly. So they're all, I mean,
It was amazing.
This is the idea. We come back and we'll end here, John, at the paradox of aggregation. One of our favourite podcast's conclusions. What is good for the individual is not always good for the collective. So the individual politician knows that if they go for increased property taxes and land taxes, they will alienate an enormous amount of voters on an individual basis. So the voters will feel individually, I don't want to pay more tax.
Yeah.
But the collective upshot of that, when it talks about the community in general, is dereliction, is far too expensive housing, is sites that are unused, and is a complete cap on development. And when there's a cap on development, it means that the supply of housing can't change, and ultimately, the prices of housing goes up.
Yeah.
So not only is there a strange situation where the individual protests against this, but they protest and they get rich. So basically you drive a wedge between property owners who own and people who are in the rental sector. And this, I think, is why people say Ireland is neoliberal, but it misdiagnoses what's going on. What's actually going on is the property owning class has got a stranglehold on the latitude of politicians' ability to move, as evidenced by your discussion on the doorstep the other day in the election. All the while, the non-property owning class, who are basically everybody under the age of 35, is being forced to pay a fortune in rent and or live with their parents and are never, ever have any prospect of going on the property ladder. And they naturally think this must be neoliberalism. But what it actually is rentierism. It is an entire economic policy driven to support the rentier class, which is the people who extract rents from other people. So it's not neoliberalism at all. In fact, the welfare state is alive and well and hopefully thriving in Ireland, or at least existing. It's actually a bizarre, strange, maybe not uniquely Irish, but particularly acute problem in Ireland here, which is the tyranny of property. And as long as you have the tyranny of property, everything else will be secondary and your political system will be fractured. We've got some great news for all listeners who are interested in business. And if you're the sort of person who turns to the business pages of the paper first, well, you're going to love this.
Yep. On Post, who have a range of products to help SMEs in Ireland, asked us to revamp and resurrect the Schumpeter slot.
Oh, you remember the Schumpeter slot? That was
do.
a deep COVID. In the middle of COVID, the Schumpeter slot was all about companies trying to pivot to figure out how to actually survive.
Yeah.
The economy when it was shut down. We did amazing small companies. You know, I've always been saying the backbone of the Irish economy are these small companies, the SMEs. If you're interested in economics and you want to know what makes the economy sink or swim, you really need to understand what's happening to these smaller businesses. And that's what we're going to dig into in partnership with An Post Commerce on this new Schumpeter slot.
Yeah.
So the other day, I had a lovely little chat with the man of Aaron Fudge Company, courtesy of An Post, John.
And one of the interesting things about the Man of Aaron Fudge is the challenge they face in getting their name out there and their products out there. They knew how to make fudge. They were experts in the craft of making fudge, but they didn't really know how to get the message and the product to their customers.
Exactly, John. So now let's get in a call to Inishmore and let's talk to Tomás Pohl, who is the chief executive of Man of Aaron Fudge. And Tomás Pohl agwing. Tomás, ¿cómo está tú?
Tá mis go mar margin.
Margin, okay.
Tá logo brau. Tá rian sa spade.
Okay, good stuff. So it's that's a beautiful day. The whole there's birds in the sky and there's fudge to be sold. So Tomás, tell me about the Man of Aaron Fudge Company. Tell me about it. How did you start and when did you start?
I'm from Inisheer in the Aran Islands. I left when I was 13, boarding school in Galway. In 1999, we were looking for something to do. I was farming, I was shearing sheep on hire, and I wanted something for my spare time. So we started making fudge, and it's been fun, and it's been successful.
Making fudge, not necessarily the thing you'd associate with the Aran Islands or the west of Ireland at all. So how did you get the idea?
Farming wasn't going well.
Yeah.
And I was nearly broke. And my granny used to make a little bit of fudge for us when we were small. But I went back to that. My gran made tablet type fudge. It's a crunchy fudge.
Mm-hmm.
And we tried that first, but it was too slow. So then we started making the soft fudge, which is our main product. And we've stayed with it all these years.
And tell me, so how do you get the stuff out of the Aran Islands and all around the country? How are you selling, getting to the market?
For the first 20 years of our business venture, we were living on the mainland. And we were going to shows, festivals, markets. We've done France, we've done England, we've done Belgium, but mostly Ireland, every weekend of the year from Patrick's Day until Christmas. 6 years ago, we moved back home to the Aran Islands and we sell here on Inishmore and my nephew sells on Inisheer in a cabin down near the beach. But we also sell online and we use the post to ship stuff.
So that's where An Post come in. It's almost like the supply chain for you.
They're very, very important to us. Without them, we couldn't cope because there's no other way that we could get our product to the mainland. The post usually goes out on the plane in the morning, but sometimes when it's foggy here, the plane don't fly, and then the postman brings it to the boat, so it still moves.
It's an extraordinary story. You start shearing sheep, farming, nearly bust. You do something your granny said, well, maybe there's a sideline in this, and we'll keep that going along with the chipper and the weekends. And over years, you have a business. Now, tell us when you look forward, what do you think? The opportunities, the threats, what are you thinking?
I'm 73 years of age, so that's a bit of a handicap.
Not at all. Not at all.
It is. I don't have the energy I did have.
Because it's hard bloody work.
But I love it, and it was a great buzz. I made fudge already this morning. That's what I done.
What flavours, Tomás?
What flavours? At the minute, we have nutty chocolate, we have rum raisin, we have plain chocolate fudge. We have vanilla, we have Rocky Road, we have plain old-fashioned caramel. After the plain is strawberry, Then we have butterscotch, chocolate and vanilla. We have Baileys. We have lemon, caramel and vanilla, chocolate, vanilla, Maltesers. By the way, the Maltesers are grown on the trees here. There's chocolate orange. There's salted caramel.
Wow.
There's honeycomb and there's peppermint.
See, John, now you wish you never asked. Well, listen, Tommaso, I mean, again, that what is fascinating is that without An Post, you wouldn't be able to stay on the island and actually create the business and generate the business and keep the business flowing.
Without the post, we could not shift stuff off the island. And without it, our business would be cut in half, I would think. The online business is growing every year.
Yeah, I know, I hear you. To get anything to scale, you need to go beyond just the face-to-face stuff,
We do, yeah.
Listen, Tomas, Bear Bua, this has been fantastic, and I hope you flog loads of fudge this afternoon.
We do our best.
All right, Tomas, listen, slán lads. Lucas.
Slán, thumbs up to the post.
So there you have it, John. Very interesting take from the man of Aaron Company there, selling their fudge. I love the level of innovation, the fact that this business has started with one fella. There's now 6 people and they're doing their stuff.
Yeah, it's an amazing success story, actually. But a lot of what he was talking about there are challenges that are basic marketing and supply chain issues. I mean, the fudge is amazing. He whole load list of them. Amazing.
He did.
Amazing stuff. But he just needed to get people to know about it and get it to the people.
You're absolutely right, John. And one of the many products and services that our partner An Post Commerce offers small and medium-sized enterprises is a thing called the Advantage Card. And this Advantage Card is a great way for small businesses to get big discounts on stamps and parcel labels. And of course, discounts on stamps means discounts on the cost of transport. And that's the whole key of getting stuff from A to B.